Welcome back to the Blink podcast. We have a very special episode today, in more ways than one. The first special thing that listeners might notice is that I am flying solo today. My co-host and good friend, Georgie, is on holiday. I'm not going to tell you where she is or what she's doing. I think that could be a good story for our next episode. But her shoes are filled and then some by a very special guest today, Nicole Smith. Delighted to have you on the show, Nicole. I think there's so much that I'm looking forward to getting into on today's episode, but why don't we just start by giving listeners a little bit of an introduction to you and some of the experiences that you've had in the world of internal comms today.
Sure. Thanks so much. Super excited to be here. So I've been leading comms for about 20 years now. Started out like many folks in the PR agency world, figuring out what industries I was interested in, as well as what type of comms specialty that really had a calling to me. I worked everywhere from agencies that handled consumer packaged goods to retail. I worked for Microsoft's PR agency for almost 3 years. I've worked for Intel, where I led emerging and brand comms, helping them launch into virtual reality, wearable sports, you kind of name it. I led corporate communications for IAC, which is Barry Diller's media and internet company. I headed up internal comms for a nonprofit called the International Rescue Committee. And I also worked at fintech disruptor and leader SoFi. And then most recently, I was at sports company Fanatics, where I oversaw corporate communications, specifically executive and internal communications for more than 22,000 employees around the globe.
So many experiences there to dwell on, and I, as Georgie would tell you, like to think about things in three. And like in this episode, there's sort of three kind of pillars that I'd like to really try and dig a little bit deeper into. So the first one really is about what it means to be a founding internal communicator, beginning functions like this from scratch, which I'm excited for. Secondly, though, what happens when things go wrong, and definitely, in the sort of conversations that we've had leading up to the show with Nicole, I think there is a real desire from our listeners not for things to be presented as perfect all the time, but actually I think some of the biggest learnings come from when things go wrong. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But then also, how do you actually prove when things are going well? Demonstrating the return on investment, if you like, from good internal comms. But I will get my wrist slapped if I avoid my favorite, quote unquote, part of our podcast, which is the forced fun. But it's going to be no drawing today. Never forced fun. I just don't like it when Georgie gets me to draw things. It really exposes a weakness of mine in the artistic side of my brain. So let's keep this conversational, Nicole.
Sure.
I think maybe just picking on that idea of failure, or shall we say, learning through struggles. Can you tell me what you would say was your worst comms moment?
Sure. So this happened pretty early in my career when I was working at a PR agency. And I since have gone on to ask my mom about this. And just to help set a little context, apparently in the late 80s and early 90s, spelling was something that was taught to children as spell how you feel, or how you wish things were spelled. And so I never really became a strong speller. And so in one of my first jobs, I had spelled something incorrectly to a client, and she came back and called it out. And I responded by saying, apologizing and saying, oh, I thought I spelt SPELT it correctly, because that's how it had sounded in my brain. Obviously, that was incorrect, and it came back that the client thought I was making fun of her, and just a huge kind of issue. And so since then, I have doubled down on my spelling. I read everything out loud before I send it back to somebody. But yeah, that was incredibly embarrassing, especially somebody within the comms field to have had not just one, but two incorrect spelling errors.
I hope you got the chance to explain this story to this person, though, because this is awesome.
I mean, I was so junior that it was quickly taken out of my hands, and they didn't want to anger the client anymore. But yeah, over the years, I just asked my mom, and she was very clear that I wasn't set up for success when it came to spelling because of how it was taught at the time.
So my little brother would love this. He works at Just Eat, and he's you can find him. I put the sexy in dyslexia. That's his handle, and he would love the idea that you can spell how you feel, because I think that's a far more inclusive way of creating words.
Yeah.
Anyway, I get it. As an internal comms person, that's a difficult strategy to maintain. Okay, cool. I like this. Thanks for getting vulnerable with us quite early, Nicole.
Sure.
This is nice. Let's continue down that theme. When have you been most humbled, if you like, working in the internal comms space? Especially given the breadth of experiences that you have. Like, what is it that you think sticks out as your most memorable, humbling moment?
Sure. So I'm going to think of humbling in the positive sense here, that I spent the bulk of my early career on the external communication side. So working very hard to get the incredible companies that I had a chance to work for out in the press and further positioning their brands. And when I had the chance to build my first internal comms program at one of the companies that I worked for, what I found so gratifying was the fact that after I had started a town hall series and brought in some opportunities for guest speakers to come in, the number of people who came up to me and said, "Thank you, Nicole, for doing this. I find this so valuable." I never heard that from anybody who read articles that I placed or any journalists that I worked with. And so why I have such a special place in my heart for internal comms is just the way that it's able to positively impact people. And that was so humbling to me because people found value in what I was doing. And I think if internal comms are done correctly, that's the transformation that you're able to make in somebody's day-to-day.
And what specifically were they finding value in that you were saying or sharing in those sessions?
Just the chance to have the opportunity to come together, to get business updates, to feel heard. I think at the end of the day, that's all we're looking for, is to be seen and to be heard. So having the opportunity to ask questions, to engage, and to be inspired was something that previously didn't exist, but something that went a long way.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think sometimes you limit the opportunity to educate and inspire people to something like the teaching profession, but I think there are multiple other ways to do that, especially in a business context. And I definitely put internal comms front and center there. And I think that people coming up to you afterwards and explaining that that was a very valuable session that they appreciated sort of speaks to that, like engaging people, inspiring them, and ultimately informing them about what's happening.
Exactly.
And so maybe, well, hopefully, riffing on that slightly, when you do find yourself in a position, another similar sort of teaching position, where perhaps new internal comms folks are coming up to you asking for advice, or they've just entered the field, what do you find yourself saying to them?
I think the biggest thing to be successful in this type of role is building relationships. So taking the time to meet with your key stakeholders, understanding how they work, what works best for them, what doesn't, because a lot of the times internal comms folks are the ones who are building bridges across the organization. And so you need to know what's going on one side to be able to connect it with the other. And where that comes from is building relationships. So I see so many people starting off their career who are just so excited to start digging in, and where they will actually get the most value is setting up coffee meetings with people across the organization to really build those relationships. So I typically try to ask people over the course of a quarter, or as part of their goals, who are the 5 to 10 people that you are going to meet with, and how are you going to nurture those relationships over time. So I think in a world that's so tech heavy, we often forget that the people part is just as important, if not more so, than the tools that we're using to get the jobs done.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Obviously, I mean, and that pervades internal comms. Like, to get things done, you need to build relationships with people. You need to build trust. Especially when those are the people for whom your success ultimately sometimes is predicated on. So yeah, I hear you. It's kind of you didn't say this, but it's like walk before you can run. Like, let's understand
Yes.
and empathize with the people that we're trying to work with before jumping straight in.
Yep.
Nice. Okay. Well, talking of jumping in, I want to talk a little bit in this session around this idea of being the first member of an internal comms team. And I've been excited to do this. I think I shared with you that I was the first salesperson at Blink, and in the kind of software world, pound in the jar there. Not supposed to mention that. In the software role, this sort of idea of being a founding go-to-market member, helping to sort of build the strategy and the go-to-market is quite well understood. But, thinking about being a founding internal communicator, I don't think it's something that gets enough airtime or at least conversations. I'd like to lift the lid here a little bit. Like, when you think about building an internal comms function literally from scratch, what does that really mean?
Sure. So I think a lot of times internal comms will either come as an afterthought, or people will think, how hard is it to write an email? So I think it's just important to start by saying, internal comms is more than just writing emails for other people. It's coming up with a strategy to inform, engage, and inspire your employees, because if they're not on board with your strategy or know their priorities or what they should be working towards, it will have a negative impact on your business. So I think first and foremost, it's about re-educating executives and those key stakeholders around what really good internal comms look like and how it can help further a business. And so it usually starts with laying that groundwork and then doing a couple of things. I have become a big data and analytics person. I had a wonderful professor named John Kane at NYU in my grad school class who just laid the foundation for what it means to ask questions and dig into data and what that can open up to you. So typically, most organizations have some sort of source of employee data. So that could be either an employee engagement survey where you can start to get a sense of what the comments are or what the feedback is, as well as some other common channels, whether it's Slack or another messaging service. If they already put an intranet together, start by doing a scrape of the data that's available to you. What are you hearing from employees? You can also start by doing some focus sessions. You need to start by understanding what's actually happening at the company. Alongside that, start to audit those channels that do exist, see how they're being used, and then start to think how they can be used better. And then lastly, I'm a big believer in, and I know we'll talk about this later in the episode, of tying your efforts to business goals. So really understanding what the business goals and priorities are for the year and how you can use internal comms to help achieve those goals. So it's, reframing what internal comms is and what it can look like for the organization, digging through the data and listening and understanding what's been going on so far and how employees are reacting, how channels are currently being used and how they could be used better. And then making sure that you have a firm grasp on the business so that whatever you're doing is going to amplify those results.
And where you've done this, I feel like that's a very practical framework to help people think about what their priorities are and the swim lanes are if you're beginning in a role like this. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes though, like where you have done this, who have you inherited the internal comms responsibilities from? And in what ways, I guess, have you built, empathy with those stakeholders who probably, to a certain extent, are sort of relinquishing, their baby, quote unquote, to you for the first time?
Yeah, so I've been in a couple of situations where there was no one, and you just kind of pick it up from scratch. But then to your point, I've worked at organizations where it's been mostly handled by either HR or marketing. And with anything, when you're coming in, you're a new person, you're starting a new function, that's where building those relationships really come in, because to your point, people do feel, I don't want to say territorial, but if they're losing something or something's being taken away from their portfolio and they question if that's based on their performance or we're all humans at the end of the day. And so how I've approached that is empowering, seeing it as positioning it as a gift so that they can go focus on what they've really been hired to do. And so if I'm taking over internal comms, you're now freed up to go focus on, delivering even better marketing campaigns for the organization. Or now you can really dig into helping employees or doing a project that you haven't had the time for. But it's tough. And there have been a few instances where, it's been a little bit bumpy along the way, but you just have to reframe it on what this transition gives to the other person. And that's been helpful.
Yeah, no, it's an extension of what we were mentioning earlier, but I guess it's those diplomacy skills that are needed sometimes to empathize with the other person. Another skill I suppose you need as an internal communicator. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, focusing not on what's being taken away from someone, but actually like the opportunity cost of it and what they're now allowed to focus on themselves.
Exactly.
And you sort of said there that, you've been in situations where you have taken this away from someone, paraphrasing, where you have taken it from a coalition of HR and marketing. You've obviously got a lot of different types of experiences in your career so far. Tell us a little bit about why internal comms and how internal comms differs in those types of functions, because it strikes me there must be some pretty practical differences in how you operate as an internal communicator based on where you are.
Yeah, so I think having it be with internal comms versus another department allows you to really look holistically at the organization. And so what I've seen in the past is when internal comms lives in marketing, they're more likely to push out their own type of material to employees, and they'll spend less time on some of the other areas of the business, right? They're using it almost as an amplification arm of their own efforts. And so while that's all great for that part of the business, it's not the whole picture. And so by having a centralized internal comms person who's essentially independent, they're able to look across the entire organization, connect the dots where they need to. I run internal comms a bit like an editorial department where, we're looking at the next couple of months. We've got a calendar. Okay, what are the news opportunities and moments we have to get out there? And we're pushing accordingly. And so when you're sitting within a type of one specific department, you're less likely to be able to do that because you're more focused on what your area of the business is driving.
Yeah, I can see that. Like having an agnostic view is super important because I can see how you'd have a real bias towards marketing content and that being their amplification arm, as you say, if that's where it lives.
Yeah.
And trying to be equitable in the flow of internal communications, I suppose, lends itself towards IC being a function within its own right. And just kind of sort of just riffing here about like when internal comms as its own function, when is there the need for that in businesses as you've seen it? Like when do people wake up one day and say, right, it's time? And does it have something to do with the fact that you have different departments all, firing and there are pockets of greatness across those individual departments, but the flow of communication and ultimately truth within an organization is totally unevenly distributed, which starts to create a business problem. I don't know, tell us a little bit more there about, the compelling event for an organization to create an IC function.
Sure. I don't know if there's a specific event, but it's when you've reached a certain scale, and that could be scale with number of employees. It could mean number of new business opportunities. It could be geographic expansion, but it gets to the point where, maybe you were a startup and you had somebody who, the founder was really overseeing this, but it's time that their focus is now up-leveled to drive more business growth or focus on other things. And so where an internal comms function comes in to be successful is when you feel that you've reached the point where employees are no longer consistently getting information. We see it pretty frequently that one part of an organization will get one message from to their employees. Another maybe will not share anything. There's differences, and so it'll be a couple of different things. You'll either be unable to communicate at that scale anymore just because of the pace of business. Or you'll start to hear from employees there's some discontent. They're not getting access to the information they need to do their jobs. So it's either, from a top up or a bottom up approach, but it'll quickly become apparent that you need to, move this into a different function versus it being just a piece of somebody's full-time job.
Yes. And that's, I think it's definitely something that we see in that when change is happening within an organization, I see sometimes takes on a totally different strategic lens. And what I mean by that is like where there are mergers, acquisitions, considerable growth, what you're communicating and how you're communicating takes on different importance. And I'm just interested in your perspective there. Like when you think about change management within a business, what role is internal comms in your experience playing? Is it as a business partner, an advisor to functions who are trying to do their own thing, or actually are you setting the tone, the cadence, and ultimately the strategy for communicating in the time of change?
I would say it's the latter. I think first it's important to recognize that change is hard and nobody likes going through change. So just recognizing that at the beginning and preparing accordingly is always the first step. So most of the change that I've worked on has not been fun. There have been multiple restructurings or layoffs or reorganizations, things that will impact people heavily on, as pertains to their day-to-day lives. But there's also been some where you just have to get it right from a business perspective when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, or you're aligning to a new strategy, or you're going after a new opportunity. So for me, what always works best is being that strategic business partner at the beginning. And I've been very lucky to work with organizations where comms is incredibly valued. And so I have had a seat at the table before where I'm being told, whether it's from the business or HR or another department, that, hey, we're going to be either acquiring a company or we're making some changes, and we sit down together and we map out what that can look like. My biggest pet peeve is when people just send out an email announcing all of the changes to everybody at once. That's asking for a disaster. You need to come up with a full change management plan. So as much as comms people need to be attuned to the latest tools and technology, they also really need to understand change management. So wherever you can, take a free course or look to further your skill set there, it's incredibly important to understand the best way to communicate a massive change to employees.
When change like this is happening, so I'm thinking about that phrase "seat at the table," and I know that it's an overused phrase, especially within our field, where internal comms has a different level of importance or different seat at the table depending on the type of organization there are. Do you see when you find out about things almost representing the size of the seat that you have at the table? I guess that's the first question. But then secondly, I question why leaders within a business are still skeptical of giving internal comms that seat, because it's a chicken and egg thing, right? Like if you don't engage strategically, then you don't get the value from the function, and therefore, that you don't feel the need to give a seat to the table. So yeah, kind of two-part question there. Like, do you see that mapping between the time that you find out about key business updates, kind of giving you an indication of the seat at the table? And two, why do you think some internal comms folks still struggle with such a seat?
Yeah, so where one of the best relationships comes in is with your external comms partner. Typically, I've sat on a couple of companies on the global communications team. So I've been privy to what type of announcements are coming up, and have worked with them to create an integrated plan so that employees are finding out before it goes external. Because they knew that when employees do find out something from an article, it creates nothing but noise. And the last thing that you want in an organization is employee noise that you haven't accounted for. And so having a good partnership with your PR team and your external comms team is incredibly important so that you're making sure employees hear the news first. And so that's the first piece. For the second part, that seat at the table, I think this also, again, comes down to relationships and really setting the agenda with your executive team to the benefits and the strategic imperative for the business that internal comms solves for. Because if you're a CFO or a C-suite member, what you're looking for is to maintain business continuity. And the best way to do that is by over-communicating to employees so that they're well aware of the change that's happening, what's being asked of them, and what they can expect. Because if you're not communicating that, again, people are not going to be focused on delivering what you want them to focus. They're going to be talking with their colleagues about what's going on. They're going to be sitting in uncertainty. They're going to be, operating out of fear. And so by making sure that you are positioning internal comms as a tool to help maintain that business continuity is incredibly key to making sure that you're a key partner within any change that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a theme here emerging, Nicole, I think, in that, again, I'm interested to get your reaction to this to see if you think I'm misinterpreting. But there's an idea that when new folks come and talk to you and get advice around internal comms, your advice to them is almost, listen, you've got to slow down to speed up, right? The positioning of the function is key. You want to go and be a journalist and write great stories and fantastic. But before you do that, you almost need to earn the right. You need to be a private investigator, a diplomat, a teacher. Kind of learning these skills of empathy, human connection beforehand, because those, if you get that bit right, then everything else will fall into place. That it builds trust with the leadership team. They will perceive that you've understood both their personal and the organization's professional goals, and then you're an ability to go and be that journalist, so to speak. I would agree with that. And again, it's positioning it as something that provides a positive impact to the business. Because if you're working at an organization, and I've been at these organizations where something's about to change and it's going to happen tomorrow, and you're being told at 4:00 the day before, we have to get something out. That's not setting anybody up for success. So if you're in a organization or a position where that's constantly happening to you, it's unfortunately on you to take that step back and start asking those questions like, how can I become a part of this process more? How can I, or be earlier? Here's why it's very important to bring me in sooner. Here are the benefits and what I can deliver to you. So similar to how you were one of the first salespeople, I also think of internal comms as a bit of an internal sales function, because we are pretty much a service piece of the organization. We're not revenue generating. And so how do you make sure that your services are being used? And that requires, again, like going out and sharing what value you can deliver to your stakeholders. It's funny. I've often thought this, we sell change from the outside, but you're often selling change from the inside. You're doing that through, both discovery, empathetic connection and storytelling ultimately. So I definitely hear you there. And let's talk a little bit, shifting gears, about technology. And I'm definitely not going to put any more dollars in the swear jar here, so to speak. But obviously, technology platforms can play a big role in the scale, the efficiency, and the authenticity behind internal communications. I'm interested to sort of pick on the vulnerability point, or the failures, the lessons learned, and so on. Because we find ourselves at a time where two things are happening. One is lots of customers are migrating over from one platform to another for reasons some of us are aware of. And other customers are really starting to wake up and understand the potential that internal comms platforms can have, particularly in light of BYOD now being the norm in most organizations. But where in your experience, and I'm sure you've been a part of a bunch of these, do these technology programs fail? And, we'll come on to talk about what we do next. But where have you seen things not go so well?
Sure. So I think it's easy when you've worked at, call it, a large corporation, and you're used to having access to certain tools and things that go help employees do their jobs. And so when you join a different organization, it's pretty easy to just think, oh, we don't have those things here, we should implement them. And so I'll give an example. An intranet is something that I've built many of. I joke that I should just open a consultancy creating intranets because I've had to build so many at this point. But where I had a failure was thinking that an organization that was on the smaller size, they didn't have an intranet. And so thinking that they absolutely needed one. And what actually wound up happening was that without people who are on board with a certain technology, without people who are dedicated to updating and maintaining that technology, it is a wasted investment. And so at this particular organization, I laid out the whole framework, the strategy, but I had no commitment from anybody that they would update their sections. And so to launch a platform that will not be consistently maintained or updated would have been a failure. So we actually wound up scrapping the project, recognizing that the business was just not there yet. And so before you look to implement a new tool or technology that you think a business should have, go back again to that business question. Is the business ready for it? Do I have everything in place that I need to be successful, not only to launch it, but to maintain it and to justify the investment? I think an intranet is a good one right now because what problem are you solving for? Are you solving for a place where everybody can find information? If that's what you're solving for, there are tools now that, are AI powered that allow you to do enterprise search across everything that you have. If you're looking to build more of a community and have an opportunity to do storytelling efforts, then an intranet makes a little bit more sense than just, putting in a search functionality. So I think it's important before you rush to put any new tool into place, thinking about, is the business at a place where we can actually take full advantage of this? And then, is this the business problem that we're solving for? Or what are we solving for here? Because there may be something else that's better set up to achieve your goals.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so 2 points there I want to come back on. Is the business at a place where it's ready for platforms like this? I'm interested to get your thoughts on how you characterize that's the sort of readiness in a moment. But in terms of knowing what problem you're solving, I mean, absolutely. Like, the space has changed so much in the past 10 years. I think that, we all need to employ that, it's there's a Socratic method, right? Of just sort of peeling the onion, understanding why, and not just, using the lazy answer of like, well, it's what businesses do. Like, it's how you solve this problem. It's like, you need an intranet, like you need a CRM or a HR platform. They are not the same. So I really could not agree more strongly with you about getting very crisp about that business problem you're solving, because I guess that's part of bringing people on the journey with you, right? Like, how are internal stakeholders going to recognize the solution if they don't understand the problem? But tell us a little bit more, I guess, practically about what you mean when you say you got to ask yourself, is the business in a place where it's ready?
Yeah. So if you are looking to, let's just go with the intranet example, how many employees do you have? If you have only a couple of hundred employees, do you really need an intranet? I don't think so, right? Because you're going to cycle through that storytelling very quickly. It's going to get stale. I would say once you reach, a couple thousand employees and you are geographically dispersed enough where there's an opportunity to create more connection as a global organization, then a tool might make more sense. But intranets are expensive. You pay per user, and you also want to make sure that you're not creating another tool that employees just have to go to. You're being very clear about what they're going to get when they go here. And then, as I shared earlier, making sure that you have enough people on board to keep that content fresh and up to date. If someone has, this is always like the dream scenario, somebody needs an HR document. They are going to the intranet instead of emailing somebody, right? This is what we wanted. We're so excited about this. Yeah. But the document they're looking for is not up there. well, you have just lost that employee from using the internet ever again. And so you need to have what I would call like a core working group of people across the organization who are dedicated to keeping this service this tool and platform updated. If your business just doesn't allow for that at this time because there's too much going on or you have other priorities, that's what you have to lean into. Instead of just saying, well, we absolutely need this tool, you have to make the time to update it. That's not going to work because people are not going to be on board with it. They have too much going on, and then the tool's not going to stick because people are not going to be able to find what they're looking for.
And what's your my brain's going in a few different directions here. Let's sort of imagine a thought experiment, right? So we know what problem we're solving. We therefore feel good about moving forward. The business is ready. Let's say we've got a few thousand employees, various different countries recently because of significant growth and so on. So you're kind of like the Nicole Smith sort of readiness test has been passed. When you think about transitioning platforms like this to BAU, tell us a little bit about your experiences there, because I think that maybe way back when an intranet was a sort of a point product that might have been looked after by someone, maybe head of internal comms. But my perception is that the delegation, the administration, and ultimately the content creation is far more democratized now. How do you help businesses get ready for a more decentralized governance model, I guess?
Yeah, so I think it's leading into those subject matter experts. While internal comms or comms in general can oversee the whole look and feel of an intranet, they can lead the editorial process of it, they can be the lead on those storytelling efforts. They are not the subject matter experts on the latest policies and procedures that have to be updated, the latest trainings that have to be completed. Those come from people across your organization. And what I have found to be so successful is leaning into that, because it provides a platform where your colleagues can reach more people and reach them in one place. And I've seen a lot of success where HR leaders in particular get really excited because they can just send a quick link to where something lives and they don't have to go searching or anything like that. Plus, the intranet just is done well. It's like a news site. So you open up your browser in the morning, welcome Nicole, here's a list of today's events, here's some trainings that are due that you haven't completed. It's your one-stop shop for everything. And so by leaning into those subject matter experts, you not only have a better product, but you're also able to update it in real time and get more people on board with using it. Because one of the things that intranet does solve for is business efficiency. So if you work in HR, you probably spend way too much time responding to employees who are looking for things. And so by retraining them and sending them to one site, you're again able to make things more efficient and free up your time to focus on those matters that actually have a real impact on the business.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go there then, because I think that sort of measuring ROI is definitely something I want to touch on. But I guess just to sort of come back on what you were saying there, and I guess leading into this idea that you are selling change from the inside. There's two aspects to it here, right? So if we agree the business is ready, we are trying then to create subject matter experts across the business to take ownership and control of, obviously, like the most lowest common denominator example is putting a policy on there, right?
Right.
But in order to do that, you are having to sell to those folks, because you're thinking about like one of their pain points, which comes up all the time, of people asking the same question a million times and creating this sort of crippling over-reliance on a group of individuals. How and why are there more opportunities for self-service in a platform like this?
Yep.
Bringing them on their journey to demonstrate that. That's a sort of a psychological sell, if you like, to get them on board. There's obviously another type of selling that you have to do, though, which is far more in dollars and cents around the business case, which, by its nature, I would argue you do need a different type of skill. It's not the kind of human, empathetic, let's bring everyone on this journey. You are actually being forced sometimes to make some assumptions and get some spreadsheets out and start to really think about the numbers. So different skill set required. Tell us, how have you done it in the past? How have you proved the value of internal comms functions and platforms?
Yeah, so I've done a couple of different things. The first is, again, to always be measuring it back to business goals. So what are you doing to further reach the goals across the organization and drive people to the impact that you want to see? And so making sure that your goals for the year are aligned with those business goals is first where to start. From a monetary perspective, I always like to show the cost savings that organizations are getting by leaning into internal comms. So for example, if you have a centralized internal comms team, how much would that cost to replicate within each of the businesses? So how much money are you saving by having a core team of experts who are working across the organization? That's one. I always like to show real dollars and savings. The other is around finding ways to measure that employees are aware of your strategy and on board with where the company is going. So I always try to work with members or whoever is leading the efforts around the employee annual survey or any type of employee surveys to get some communications questions in there that I can use to show that what we are doing is working and it's driving employees to be focused on the right things. And then of course it's making sure that you're looking at the tools that you have access to. So whether you're using something like HubSpot or another type of CRM platform for emails, you're looking at the open rates, how many people have actually clicked through to what you want them to. If you're doing a newsletter, how many people are clicking through to the links that you have in there. Slack, are people using Slack in the right ways? Slack is a productivity channel. It's not a replacement for email. That's something that I see pretty frequently. So how are you making sure that people are engaging and taking action on the whatever messenger tool that you're using? And then I think another good, more qualitative piece is around the types of questions that employees start to ask at events. So normally when there's not a lot of trust or transparency at an organization, employees will continuously ask some of the same questions that are more basic. Am I getting a cost of living raise? Am I are there layoffs coming? And if you're doing your job well, you will start to see over the course of time that those questions become more business specific. So they'll say, there'll be more about the business strategy, about the future, because you've already over communicated what your positions are on some of these other things, and that trust has been built. So I always like to set out over the course of the year with a set of KPIs that show the value in dollars and cents I'm delivering to the organization, how we're contributing to the business goals and the overall strategy, how our tools are worth the ROI and we're getting employee engagement across them, and then how we're seeing the employee experience change over time through building trust. So I try to look at it in a bunch of different ways to create a comprehensive picture.
Yeah, I'm very interested by the idea that the questions that employees ask in events give you, and it stands to reason, right? I think you find out probably more about what questions people are asking, maybe than sometimes they find out about the answer you give. But what I'm trying to spit out here is that it's almost about they align with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so to speak. So if there's low trust and, we're not really satisfying some of their most basic needs, we're going to be sticking with questions towards the bottom of the pyramid, right? About their kind of, most basic fundamental physiological needs or pay or what have you. But if people do feel as though actually we're compounding trust and those needs are met, we're asking quite specific questions about strategy and competing and how do we self-actualize as a company, I guess.
Yeah. And if you're seeing that, and if you're consistently seeing that you're getting some of these basic need questions at events, instead of just ignoring it or writing these employees off, because it's not just one employee, right? Employees talk, they talk in groups. So this is one employee who's speaking on behalf of others. You just have to think of it that way. You need to do some more work. And so what that can include is, having one of your leaders do, more frequent touch points in one of your offices, doing an AMA, taking an opportunity to film a video that explains your compensation philosophy, for example. So that way, if you're getting these questions, you can also just redirect back to materials you've already created as well. And so if you're getting those questions, you should be asking yourself more questions than just discounting them.
But I'm curious, as much as I agree, how things like that and answers to the employee comms survey help to build a business case. And maybe what sits behind this is a discussion around sort of ROI and ROE, and where you sort of sit on this debate about are you trying to show to the business a dollar value as a normal business case would, or I suppose is there an understanding and an acceptance that actually this is the crux of the problem? Our people are not a cost or an asset to be managed. They are a competitive advantage to be unleashed. We need to be thinking about the return on employee, not the return on investment. How do you kind of think about that?
That's tough. It depends on who you're talking to and your leader, right? If you're talking to a CFO who's more looking at the investment and the money spent, you're going to have have a different conversation than if you were, talking to a chief people officer or head of strategy or something like that. But I think it's important to not have either or, but both. And so for me, it's, here is what we're hearing from employees. Here's what we're hearing from employees. Here is what's top of mind for them. And if they're asking these types of questions, we know that they're not focused or understanding of the full business strategy. So it's having both the recognition that, one, there's trust that is missing that has to be built. And if we build that trust, we will see employees be less concerned about, their day-to-day, their paychecks, and more focused on the end result for the business. And so I think by bringing them together, you'll get a lot more benefit than just one or the other. And I think when you're presenting to the executive team, you have to understand that you'll have a CFO and a chief people officer there. So by going one way or the other, it's not going to help you in the end. You have to combine them both at the same time because you're speaking to very different stakeholders.
I love that. They can't and shouldn't be mutually exclusive. I think that, I would wager that lots of the listeners understand and naturally are able to connect more with the CPO persona than the CFO. And sometimes this is where it can come unstuck. I mean, any kind of lessons learned from you, Nicole, about where, how to have a good conversation with a CFO around a business case and perhaps what to avoid?
Yeah, so focus less on employee feelings and sentiment and more on the business value. So anywhere that you can, like I shared earlier, find ways to show the efficiencies that you're saving. So for example, how can you quantify, if you're putting an intranet into place, how much time you're saving your HR or other teams by not having them answer employee questions over email all the time. And if you're looking to put an AI solution into place, same thing, right? This is going to make our organization more efficient. By making this investment, we will save this amount of money this way. So I have learned over the years that you have to structure your presentations based on who you're presenting to, and the CFOs, less small talk, less about employee feelings, more about hard dollars and cents of where you're saving and where you're able to drive additional value through the efforts that you're putting into place.
Yeah, and which is all, I suppose, it's another type of skill I think that effective internal communicators need, is being able to adapt, which, some people would call the chameleon, which I think has negative connotations, but it doesn't need to. I think it's about knowing the audience that you're trying to reach and changing the way you're communicating accordingly.
Exactly. If you want to achieve your goals and get what you need to drive that value for the organization, you have to be able to present to different people in a way that's going to help you get there. And so, if you're spending time talking to a CFO by, the same way you would a chief people officer or a head of marketing, which is more focused on, storytelling and other things like that, they're quickly going to lose interest. Like, go in there, focus on your numbers and focus on what you'll be able to do next.
There's lots of things here, Nicole, I've enjoyed talking about and frankly, quite excited to try. Just like spelling how I feel. I'll try this out with my team this week, see how far I get. But no, in all seriousness, this idea I think of slowing down to speed up. That means, thinking about all of the other skills that you need to be an internal communicator. I think we've just added another one there, almost metaphorically being multilingual, being able to change the language you're speaking in addition to sort of diplomacy skills, being a natural teacher and a private investigator, trying to find what's happening in an organization from different people's perspectives. If you can get those bits right, then everything else will fall into place, which is I think a really powerful lesson for certainly new people in the field to be reflecting on. I think the other thing I've enjoyed talking about is the fact that there are real parallels actually with the sales profession. Specifically, knowing the problem that you're solving before trying to introduce any kind of change. And then psychologically, bringing other stakeholders with you on that journey, unlocking the potential of an organization requires an internal coalition, and the extent to which you can build that, I think, will make you successful. But finally, clearly, that last mile of framing the business case is super important. And I love what you shared around mapping that to the business goals, which obviously sounds obvious, but I think sometimes the best advice is you need to have a granular strategy for any change you're introducing. Someone was talking to me about this last week, taking these high-level concepts that a business is trying to achieve, but actually demonstrating to those working with you how you can couch that in a very specific and granular change strategy, I think is a key lesson. And then finally, as we're saying there, being able to adapt the real substance behind the business case depending on who you're talking to.
Yep.
So thank you. That was a very educational conversation for me. I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed it. I hope you have too.
I have. Thank you. That was a great summary. So thank you.
You know what I feel like right now? I've got a little sort of parrot version of Georgie just sitting here on my shoulder. And what she's saying is you can't forget the internal comms playlist.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard about this, but we are building a Spotify playlist that characterizes people's experiences of internal comms. So we would love to know if you do have something that you'd like to add to that you think best represents your perspectives on the function. Maybe while I give your brain time to think about that, please do let listeners know how, if you're happy with this, Nicole, they might be able to connect with you after the show comes out. I'm sure folks might have a couple of questions they'd be indebted to you for engaging on.
Yeah. Of course.
So how can they connect with you, and what would you have us listen to?
Sure, yeah. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. My email's on there. If you should be able to find me pretty easily. I'm more than happy to connect. And then for my playlist song, obviously, if you work in internal comms, you have to do a lot of sizzle reels. And there's always been a song that I've wanted to use, which I think just sums up the whole experience. And I think it just pumps you up too, because you're also hosting so many events, and it's still nerve-wracking no matter how many events that you do, because you're on such a big scale. And so the song that I will add is Fatboy Slim's Right Here, Right Now. I think it not only makes for a wonderful sizzle reel song, but I also just use it as a bit of a pump up song before I'm going into a big event. And the lyrics are pretty straightforward too, that internal comms is right here, right now.
Oh my God, I love it so much. I mean, that's the hype song to end all hype songs right there.
Yeah.
Respect. Love it. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank
pleasure
you.
to have you on the show. And we will talk to you again soon.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.